Have you ever lived in a house so beautiful that even happiness seemed gilded in gold? Yet every morning, you woke to an emptiness so deep you could no longer hear your own heartbeat. She once thought she had everything: love, fame, a perfect husband, and a life others could only dream of. But one afternoon, it all dissolved like soap bubbles, all because of a single phone call behind a glass door. From a woman betrayed, she vanished from the glittering world, leaving behind the paradise others had built for her, to relearn how to live, breathe, and write her own pain into words. This is the story of Mariah Castellano, the woman who walked away with nothing, only to return with an entire sky of freedom. And perhaps, somewhere within her story, you may find a reflection of yourself. This is Aftermath Resolution, When the Sun Returns. New York, a December afternoon. Winter light slid through the glass walls of the Park Avenue penthouse, cold as a freshly sharpened blade. Everything in that home was perfect to the point of lifelessness. Marble floors polished to a mirror's shine, black and white art aligned with precision, the faint trace of an expensive perfume that smelled of emptiness. Mariah Hunt stood before the oak door of her husband's study, her hand trembling slightly on the brass handle. That same hand had once polished it every evening, a quiet ritual of the perfect wife. But today, perfection felt like a shackle. Inside, Sebastian's voice carried warm, confident, commanding the voice of a man used to having the world listen. "Allison, trust me. She won't leave. Mariah couldn't last a week without my money." Mariah froze. For a second, her heart seemed to stop. Then came a soft, feminine laugh, cool and cutting. Allison Rodriguez, a name just familiar enough to twist her gut. "Sebastian, when will you end this charade? I'm tired of being the one in the shadows." "Soon. Friday. I'll tell her everything once she signs the papers for the charity fund. When the deal closes, I'm free." The words dropped like hammers. Each syllable pierced through the door and into her chest like invisible needles. She had once believed their marriage, though distant, still held a trace of respect. But no. 7 years had been nothing more than a contract, a performance, and she merely a prop in his tableau of success. Inside, their laughter softened. "What if she fights back?" Allison asked, half curious, half contemptuous. "She's pragmatic. She'll take the money and disappear. People like her only talk about dignity until dignity starts to make them hungry." Heat surged to Mariah's face. Her breath caught unclear whether from tears or fury rising from the depths of her being. She stepped back, covering her mouth to stifle a sob. The wall before her seemed to crumble, sliding down with the dying light. The home that once felt like a haven now stood as a monument to her humiliation. On the dining table, where they'd hosted charity dinners, lay a bouquet of white roses Sebastian had sent Allison that morning, the note reading, "For our future." Mariah let out a quiet laugh, the kind that comes when a dream finally ends. She turned toward the bedroom. The mirror reflected a 3-4-year-old woman, magazine beautiful, but hollow-eyed. 7 years of silken luxury had stripped her of her own voice. She had once been Mariah Castellano, a short story writer who was once praised in literary magazines. Now, she was only Sebastian Hunt's wife. The door opened. He entered, loosening his tie, still speaking on the phone. His voice was warm but not for her. When he finally noticed Mariah, he paused, mildly surprised. "You're still home? I thought you were at the spa. You're having an affair with Allison Rodriguez, right?" The room thickened into silence. Sebastian stood still for a few seconds, the flicker of guilt quickly replaced by calm. "Yes. 6 months now. She understands me in ways you don't." The air left her lungs. "And what were you going to tell me? That I want to keep both?" "Both?" "Yes. You're my wife, the one who manages my life, who represents me. She's a colleague, an intellect, another kind of drive. We're adults, Mariah. Adults can make arrangements." She looked at him, her voice low but sharp. "You think I'll agree to share my husband? I think you're realistic enough to know what leaving means. You have no job, no income, no home. I can ensure your comfort, but don't ruin our balance." She stayed silent for a long moment. The light from the lamp reflected in the mirror 2 people standing worlds apart. "You know," she said softly. Maybe you're right. I have nothing. But that also means I have nothing left to lose. Sebastian frowned, lowering his voice. You need time to calm down. I have surgery in the morning. We'll talk later. He left the room as though ending a meeting. The door closed. Mariah sat on the bed, breathing hard, then laughed a sound sharp with pain and clarity. Part of her died in that moment, but another part was born. Night descended over Manhattan like a heavy velvet curtain. In the room once filled with luxurious dreams, Mariah opened the closet and pulled out an old canvas bag. She began packing her life, only the things still felt like hers. A pair of worn jeans with paint stains from an old art class, a few soft t-shirts, her old camera, and her grandmother's Bible, its pages yellowed with notes. She folded them carefully, as if preparing for a final departure, and in truth, she was. She walked through the house one last time, running her fingers along the furniture, the door frame, and the painting they had once chosen together. Everything expensive, everything meaningless. She left her wedding ring on the marble counter beside the keys, the credit cards, and a note that read, "You're right, I can't live in your world. But you're wrong, I will live. Just not here." Then she took a photo, a record of her choice. Mariah put on her thick wool coat and slung the bag over her shoulder. The elevator chimed a clean ting, like the curtain call of a play. She stepped out into the street. The wind struck her face, sharp as glass. New York glowed bright and indifferent. Mariah pulled her scarf close, her breath forming pale clouds. Inside her wallet, $1,247, the money she'd saved from selling her grandmother's antique book collection. Back then, she hadn't known why. Now she did, survival instinct. She dialed a number. "Lucia, it's me. I need a place to stay." "Oh, Mariah, where are you? Don't say another word. Come here. The lights on you still have the spare key." 40 minutes later, Mariah stood before the brownstone in Fort Greene. The door opened. Lucia said nothing, she just wrapped her in a hug. "Welcome home, my girl." Mariah buried her face in her friend's shoulder, tears spilling freely. She cried for the 7 years she'd lost, for the love she once believed in, for the fear rising in her chest and the faint, fragile hope that maybe she would survive. Lucia guided her to the kitchen table and poured a cup of chamomile tea. "You don't have to say anything. Just know this. You're safe now. He said I couldn't live without him." "Good. Prove him wrong." Outside, snow began to fall. Streetlights glowed golden through the haze. Mariah looked out, whispering, "I'm scared, Lucia." Lucia smiled gently, her hand resting on Mariah's. "Fear means you're waking up. Only those still asleep don't know they're sinking." That night, Mariah lay in Lucia's small bed, listening to the distant rumble of the subway. She didn't sleep, but she didn't cry either. Inside her, something tiny began to stir, a seed Sebastian could never own or destroy. The next morning, she woke before dawn. Sitting at the kitchen table, she opened her old laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dark. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. She placed her hands on the keyboard, took a deep breath, and began to type the first line of her new life. On her first morning after leaving the penthouse, Mariah sat on the small guest bed in Lucia's apartment. The dim winter light slipped through thin white curtains, soft enough to make everything look misted over. Lucia's brownstone in Fort Greene wasn't fancy, but it breathed. There was the smell of coffee, the creak of old wooden floors, and a jazz tune from the 70s humming from the radio. Everything here had a kind of warmth the million-dollar penthouse had never known. Lucia came in with 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" Mariah shook her head gently. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him and hear what he said." Lucia sat beside her, handing over the steaming cup. "Coffee doesn't erase memories," she said, "but it helps you see them clearly. That's a start." The words anchored Mariah, keeping her from drifting in the chaos. She took a sip. The bitterness was real and oddly comforting. Lucia went on, her tone steady. "Mariah, he was wrong. No one survives forever in a gilded cage. You're out now, so breathe." Mariah smiled faintly. He called that life balance. Said he could have me and her. Lucia raised an eyebrow. That's not balance. That's control. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up the hum of traffic, voices calling, children laughing in the narrow alleyway. Mariah looked at it all, feeling like she'd returned to the real world. No more glittering illusions, just ordinary life. And in it, a space that could belong to her. She pulled out her laptop. The screen lit up, reflecting a tired but steady face. I don't even know where to begin, Lucia. I haven't written in 7 years. Lucia smiled. Then start with that. Write about disappearing. Mariah stared at the blinking cursor on the blank screen. She took a breath and typed the first line. I disappeared from my own life without ever noticing when it happened. The words came not from her mind, but from her heart. They poured out. She wrote until dusk, fingers flying, tears falling, but never stopping. From time to time, Lucia set a cup of tea beside her, saying nothing. By evening, Mariah looked at the screen over 4,000 words. She didn't even know what she'd written, only that her chest felt lighter. Lucia read the piece, tears splashing onto the keyboard. Oh God, Mariah, this isn't just you, this is millions of women. Mariah lowered her eyes, whispering, I don't think anyone will read it. Then post it anyway. Not for fame, for freedom. Mariah opened Medium and created a new account, at Mariah Writes Again. She titled the piece, The Mathematics of Disappearance. Then she hit publish. When the message appeared, Your story is live, she sat still, hollow and trembling. Part of her was afraid to be seen. Another part knew she had just reclaimed her right to be seen. The next morning, her phone was glowing. 10,000 reads, 500 comments, messages that made her breath catch. You just wrote my life. I thought I was crazy for feeling this way. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. Lucia stepped out of the kitchen, saw the screen, and burst into tears. See? You're reaching people you've never even met. Mariah could hardly believe it. In one night, her voice, the one that had been strangled for 7 years, was echoing everywhere. 2 days later, Mariah received an email from Jennifer Walsh, a literary agent in Manhattan. I've read your piece 3 times. You have a rare voice, honest, unembellished, unafraid. I believe we can turn this into a book. Would you be open to talking? Mariah read the message over and over. Part of her wanted to respond instantly. Another part didn't dare to believe it. Lucia laughed when she saw it. God, you've been writing again for 2 days, and someone already wants to sign you. That's the clearest sign in the world, baby girl. On a video call, Jennifer appeared the next day, short blonde hair, sharp eyes, a firm, confident voice. Your story is exactly what the world needs right now. Women are waking up, and you're living proof. I'm not anyone special, Mariah said softly. Exactly. You're every woman who's ever been made small. When the call ended, Mariah wept not from fear, but because someone saw her worth for the first time in years, not as someone's wife, but as herself. Meanwhile, a few miles away in Manhattan, Sebastian Hunt was leaving an emergency meeting at the bank. Sir, according to the legal structure, company accounts require both your and Mrs. Hunt's signatures. Without hers, we can't release funds. What? You personally approved this structure during the 2021 asset reorganization. Sebastian's face drained of color. He tried to stay composed, but his hands trembled. So what do I do now? Contact her, or file a claim, but that process will take months. No sooner had he hung up than another call came, his father's voice, sharp as a blade. What the hell are you doing, Sebastian? The Riverside project's frozen because we need Mariah's signature. Find her now. I don't know where she is. Silence on the other end, long, cold, slicing. You don't know. You drove away the only person who could save you. Brilliant. Handle it yourself. When the call ended, Sebastian sank into his chair. In his hand was a phone with no one left to call. The woman he once thought replaceable now held the key to his entire empire. That afternoon in Brooklyn, Mariah received a message from a reader. I've read your story 3 times. I'm living the same marriage. You gave me the courage to leave. Tears welled up as she stared at the screen. She didn't know the woman's name, but she knew one thing. Her words saved lives. Lucia came over and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "See, your pain has a purpose." Mariah smiled, truly smiled, for the first time. "I think I just started living." That night, she stepped onto the balcony, looking down at the quiet Brooklyn street. The wind was still cold, but not as cruel as the night she'd left the penthouse. Far away, Manhattan's lights shimmered like trapped stars behind glass. Mariah breathed deeply, letting the wind run through her hair. Inside her, fear had vanished, replaced by a single, steady thought. "You said I couldn't live without you. I'll show you I won't just live. I'll shine." She turned back inside, opened her laptop, and began typing her next piece. "The day I chose to leave paradise." Nights in Brooklyn had their own rhythm, not as loud as Manhattan, not as still as the suburbs. Just a quiet symphony, the distant hum of the subway, the wind whispering through the trees, and the faint pulse of jazz drifting from a small bar somewhere down the street. Mariah sat by the window, laptop open. The screen's glow reflected on her face, shadows beneath her eyes soft, but her gaze brighter than ever. Messages kept pouring in, hundreds of them. Women from all over the country, thanking her, sharing their pain, telling her that they had begun to be brave. She read each one, her heart aching and warm all at once. Every story was a different wound, but all carried the same scar, the lie that they were not enough. Lucia walked in from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "You've been writing since morning." "I can't seem to stop. The moment I sit down, my hands just move. It's like my body remembers how to breathe again." Lucia set the cup on the table. "That's the best thing I've heard all week. It means you're coming back to life." Mariah smiled faintly. She looked down at her trembling fingers, not from cold, but from emotion spilling out faster than she could type. She wrote about the loneliness of women in beautiful homes, what it means to live beside someone you love, yet feel invisible, and the price of trading freedom for safety. Each new essay she posted on Medium spread further than the last, the math of disappearing. "To leave without burning bridges. How I learned to breathe again." Every title was a piece of her life, and thousands of others. One early morning, Jennifer Walsh called, her voice charged with excitement. "Mariah, something incredible is happening. Major publications are quoting your work. I think it's time we talk about book rights." Mariah froze. "A book? I only wrote to survive. And that's exactly why people want to read it. The things that save us aren't written to sell, they're written to live." Mariah looked out the window. The sky was pale, washed in morning fog. An old dream stirred the dream of writing one she thought had died the day she said "I do." That afternoon, she and Lucia walked through Fort Greene Park. The wind rustled through the bare trees, dry leaves scattered, and children chased their shadows along the cracked pavement. "You know," Lucia said, "when you write, you're not just telling your story. You're rewriting history for hundreds of women. You're permitting them to choose themselves. I'm afraid I'm not strong enough for that. No one's strong at the start, love. The strong are just the ones who begin while they're still weak." Mariah smiled, eyes glistening. She realized then healing wasn't forgetting. It was looking back without flinching. While Mariah was writing herself into the light, Sebastian Hunt was slowly slipping into darkness. Sebastian Hunt was slowly slipping into darkness on the other side of the Hudson River. One morning, he arrived at his office to find his nameplate gone. A new assistant greeted him with carefully measured politeness. "The board has voted to suspend you as CEO, sir. The accounts remain frozen. And Mrs. Hunt hasn't responded to the legal requests." Sebastian said nothing. Every sound, typing and phone ringing, hit his ears like blows. He reached for his phone and redialed Mariah's number. The screen flashed. Blocked. He tried email. "Mariah, I need to talk. Just 5 minutes, please." Error message. Delivery failed. She had erased him from her world. That evening, he sat alone in the silent penthouse. The glass walls were still spotless, but now they reflected not confidence, only the face of a man who had lost everything. He turned on the TV and by chance, the news was broadcasting an interview. Author Mariah Hunt, the woman behind the viral phenomenon, the math of disappearing, has inspired millions of readers across America to rediscover themselves. Sebastian froze. Her face filled the screen, calm, deep-eyed, steady-voiced. "I once believed I would die without him," she said. "But then I realized I already had. Quietly, slowly. Writing was how I came back to life." Sebastian turned off the TV, sitting motionless. His throat tightened for the first time in years, and his eyes burned. Every word dragged him back to when he dismissed her, silenced her, and dimmed her light. Now, that same light blazed brighter than ever, only it no longer shone on him. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Mariah sat at her usual cafe, typing the last lines of her newest piece. Outside, snow fell thick and golden in the streetlights, wrapping the neighborhood in hope. She wrote, "No one can take your voice unless you hand it to them yourself. I once did, and now I'm taking it back." She pressed publish. The words appeared, "Your story is live." Lucia came in with 2 steaming cappuccinos. "Anything special?" "No," Mariah said with a soft smile, her eyes alight. "Just an ordinary day." She paused, then added quietly, "An ordinary day, but the first one I feel free." Outside, the snow kept falling. A soft jazz tune floated through the cafe, "Fly Me to the Moon." Mariah closed her eyes, listening, breathing, and in the city's darkness, she found her own light. One early morning in January, the rare winter sunlight streamed through the small window of the Brooklyn apartment. Mariah opened her laptop. Hundreds of emails awaited her, messages, invitations, interview requests. But one subject line made her heart stop for a few seconds. Subject: Offer of representation, Jennifer Walsh, Hartley, and Marks Literary. She clicked it open. "Mariah, I've read all your pieces. Your voice is both wounded and luminous, fragile yet fierce. Your story isn't just an essay, it's a book the world needs. I want to represent you." Mariah read the message repeatedly, her hands shaking so much she had to set her teacup down. Lucia walked in, saw her expression, and laughed. "Oh God, don't tell me more good news." "Lucia, she wants to represent me. A real agent, one who's worked with major authors. Then what are you waiting for, baby girl? Say yes." Mariah laughed through tears, not from shock, but disbelief. 7 years ago, she'd stopped writing because a man once told her, "Literature doesn't pay rent." Now, those exact words were paying for her second chance at life. The next day, she joined a video call. Jennifer appeared to have blonde hair, a light blazer, and calm, confident eyes. "Mariah, I'll be brief. You have a book inside you. I want to help bring it into the world. I've never written anything that long before. You already have. You need to gather the pieces." Mariah fell silent. In that moment, she understood sometimes you don't need to know if you can do something. You need someone who believes you can. 3 weeks later, they signed the representation contract. From a woman who left with $1,247 and an old canvas bag, Mariah was now officially an author signed with one of New York's top literary agencies. Lucia celebrated with a small dinner: pasta, red wine, and slightly burnt toast. "To the woman who left paradise to build her own," she declared, raising her glass. Mariah laughed, clinking hers. "I don't think this is paradise, but at least this time, it's real." Outside, the city still glowed bright, but the light in that little kitchen was warmer than all of it. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Sebastian Hunt walked into what used to be his office. The nameplate Sebastian Hunt, CEO, had been replaced with Marcus Chen. He stood in the doorway, taking in the room that once belonged to him. Everything was the same, the ebony desk and the Hudson's view, yet nothing bore his trace. His new assistant lowered his gaze. "The board made it official this morning, sir. You've been reassigned as honorary advisor." "Honorary?" Sebastian's laugh was hollow. "I get pushed out of the company I built, and they call that honor." No one answered. He walked out, his footsteps echoing sharply. Outside, the headlines had already spread. "Sebastian Hunt, founder of Hunt Medical, steps down amid financial crisis." The New York Post was worse. It mentioned frozen accounts, a missing ex-wife. Ex-wife. The word stung like a blade. She hadn't just left. She had vanished, and somehow, the world saw her as a hero, while he had become the villain. That afternoon, Sebastian sat alone in the silent penthouse. He turned on the TV, hoping for a distraction, but a familiar face flashed across the news screen. Author and social advocate Mariah Castellano, formerly Mariah Hunt, has just signed a 6-figure book deal with HarperCollins. He turned off the TV, but the phrase echoed in his head. 6 figures. She used to write in their living room to pass the time. He once told her, "Your writing's fine, but don't fool yourself, it'll never feed anyone." Now, it was feeding her and starving him. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Mariah sat at her favorite cafe, writing the first chapters of her manuscript. The title, Aftermath Resolution, Rebirth, After Ruin. She wasn't writing to get even. She was writing to understand why she had once accepted so little, to trace how fear could turn into chains, and how freedom wasn't about running away, but staying true to herself. Jennifer called, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Mariah, 5 publishers are bidding for your book. The highest offer is $225,000. Congratulations, my dear." Maria smiled, eyes shimmering. "He used to tell me I'd never earn a dime from writing. And now? Now, I'll write for the rest of my life." That night, she and Lucia celebrated with cold pizza and cheap wine. No luxury, no glamour, but full of absolute joy. Lucia raised her glass. "To the woman who once trembled at her own doorway, and now makes the world pause to listen." Mariah laughed, eyes bright. "And to the woman who kept the door open when no one else did." Their glasses clinked. Laughter filled the small apartment, echoing farther than the city lights outside. That morning, Mariah sat in her small Park Slope apartment, the laptop screen glowing in the gentle winter light. In her inbox, one email made her pause before opening it. Subject: "Congratulations, Mariah. You're a New York Times bestseller." She read the line repeatedly, then laughed, a sound that broke somewhere between disbelief and joy. She texted Lucia 3 simple words: "We did it." Moments later, Lucia called, her voice trembling. "You know, baby girl, 7 years ago I prayed you'd find yourself again, and now you're living for thousands of women." Mariah smiled, her eyes glistening. "Lucia, I just wrote my story." "No, you wrote our story. For everyone who was ever made to feel small." That evening, she sat in her book-filled room, surrounded by stacks of letters from readers, women from Texas, California, Florida, Canada, and Europe. One read, "I read your book in one sitting. The next morning, I left my husband. Thank you for giving me courage." Mariah held that letter for a long time. She had never imagined that the words she once wrote in Lucia's tiny kitchen could change someone's life, let alone thousands. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Mariah, great news, Paramount wants to adapt Aftermath Resolution into a film." "A film?" "Yes. They said your story could touch hearts around the world." Mariah went silent. She remembered that night she left the penthouse a single bag, a drained account, a soul in pieces. Now, from those ashes, she was watching herself turn into fire. Across town, Sebastian Hunt sat in a temporary office, a small rented space, with no floor-to-ceiling windows, no assistant, and no politeness. "Good morning, Mr. Hunt," his old lawyer called. "Sebastian, I just got confirmation she's officially reclaimed the Castellano name. Legally, there are no remaining ties between you." "I understand." "And the board has appointed Marcus Chen as full CEO. You no longer have a seat on the executive committee." Sebastian said nothing. A weary sigh came from the other end. "You know, there are some numbers you can't negotiate anymore, and you've already spent your luck." When the call ended, he stared out the window. No Hudson River, no Manhattan skyline, only his own reflection staring back. He remembered his father's words, "A man can lose money, but if he loses his integrity, he loses everything." Sebastian finally understood what he'd lost wasn't an empire. It was himself. 3 months later, Mariah stood on stage at the Women Reclaiming Voices conference in Los Angeles. More than 800 women filled the audience. Warm amber lights illuminated faces that glowed with quiet strength. She spoke. "Someone once told me I couldn't live without him. What he didn't understand is that women have survived far worse than a broken love. Applause thundered through the hall. Mariah smiled not with pride, but with the calm of someone who had fallen to the bottom and risen again. Afterward, a middle-aged woman approached her, gripping her hands tightly. "I'm 54. Yesterday, I filed for divorce. Because of you." Mariah embraced her. "No, because of you. I reminded you of what you'd forgotten, that you can choose yourself." Stepping outside, Mariah looked out over Los Angeles, shimmering in the sunset. The last light of day reflected on the glass towers, the same light she once thought she'd lost. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Sebastian had begun weekly therapy with Dr. Patricia Morrison. The small room smelled faintly of mint and carried a calm glow. "You said you came here because you lost everything," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "But I think you lost yourself long before she left." Sebastian nodded, eyes hollow. "I thought success could fill every void. But I've realized the emptiest space was the compassion I let die." "Do you want her forgiveness?" "I want her happiness, even if it's without me." For the first time, the therapist smiled gently. "Then maybe, just maybe, you're finally becoming the man she once hoped you could be." Sebastian didn't reply. Tears slid down his face, silent, unguarded. Not the tears of a man mourning his power, but of one mourning the humanity he'd forgotten. That night, he turned on the TV in his small apartment for company. On screen, a feature segment played. Tonight on Good Morning America, Mariah Castellano, from betrayed wife to best-selling author inspiring millions. He froze as her face appeared, serene eyes, confident smile. The host asked, "If he's watching right now, what would you want to say to him?" Maria smiled. "Nothing at all. My life now is the answer." Sebastian nodded, as if she were speaking directly to him. "I understand," he whispered. In Brooklyn, Mariah sat in her workspace, writing the final line of her new book, The Architecture of Becoming. She didn't know that somewhere in the city, a man was learning to listen, take responsibility, and live truthfully, however late. She only knew one thing. Sometimes the cost of our mistakes isn't measured in money, but in awakening. And sometimes, awakening is the most expensive gift life makes us pay for. One soft May afternoon, Brooklyn was drenched in golden light. Mariah sat in the small meeting room of the Sunset Park Women's Center, looking out at the neat rows of plastic chairs before her. 19 women of all ages filled the room. A 20-year-old who had just left an abusive boyfriend, a 60-year-old mother newly divorced after decades of silence. All of them watched her, the woman they knew from Aftermath Resolution. Mariah took a slow breath. She placed a stack of papers on the table, her voice gentle but steady. "For our first session, we won't try to write well, or even write right. We'll write truthfully, write what we've never dared to say." The room went still. Then, from the back row, a small voice asked, "What if I don't know what I want to say?" Mariah smiled softly. "Then start with, 'I don't know.' That's the most honest sentence you can write." The tension in the room loosened. Heads bent, pens touched paper. The quiet rustle of writing filled the air, broken only by faint, trembling breaths, and the sound of courage slowly being born. Mariah walked among them, listening to the scratching of pens, the rhythm of their hearts, the soft sobs swallowed halfway down. She stopped beside a woman with sun-browned skin and sad, deep eyes. "What's your name?" "Carmen." "What are you writing, Carmen?" "I'm writing that I'm scared, but I'm also writing that I'm still here." Mariah smiled and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "And that's already a whole chapter." The afternoon slipped by in slanted light. Mariah read a few of their lines aloud. The words were rough, trembling, but true to the bone. A 5-year-old wrote, "I used to apologize every time he hit me. Today, I apologize to myself for staying too long." A mother wrote, "I've never said my name outside of being a wife or a mum. Today, I write it again, Rosa." Mariah's throat tightened as she listened. She remembered herself on that night she left the penthouse, frightened, hollow, lost. She had been them, and because of that, she understood how much every tear in this room was worth. After the session, Lucia came to pick her up. "I just heard the center's fully booked," Lucia said, grinning. "They want to open a second class. I never thought so many people would need to write. Everyone does. They just never had permission before." They walked together down the avenue, The smell of pastries, jazz spilling from car radios, the laughter of children weaving through the noise, peace in all its ordinary beauty. Mariah looked up at the sky. The sunset reflected off glass windows, turning the city gold. "Lucia," she said softly, "I think I've found what I was born to do." Lucia slipped an arm around her. "Not think, sweetheart, no. You were born to write, and to help others write themselves back into being." Then Lucia smiled. "This might just be the best comeback story I've ever seen." Mariah laughed, her eyes shining. Not a comeback, a becoming. Across the city, another soul was also learning to become slowly, painfully. Sebastian Hunt sat in a small room at the Street Marks Center for Emotional Recovery in Manhattan. No suit, no silver watch, just a gray sweater and khaki pants. Looking like anyone else, around him sat 8 men, executives, lawyers, doctors, each one undone by pride, addiction, or the quiet collapse of a life built too high. The counselor asked, "Who wants to share what they've learned this week?" Sebastian lifted his head. Light from the window caught his face softer now, stripped of the armor it once wore. "I used to think I could control everything, money, people, even love. But the more I tried to hold it all, the more I lost myself." He paused. "I once had a wife, an extraordinary woman. I made her believe her worth depended on being beside me. Now I see she was the best part of me." Silence fell. A man across from him nodded quietly. The counselor asked, "Do you think you'll tell her that?" "No." He shook his head. "She doesn't need to hear it. But I need to say it to learn how to become someone worthy of forgiveness, even if she never gives it." That night, Sebastian walked home through quiet streets. He stopped by a small bookstore near his apartment. In the front display sat Aftermath Resolution. He picked it up, tracing the cover, her standing in the middle of a street, eyes forward, light spilling behind her like a halo. He opened to the dedication, "For those who were made to believe they weren't enough. You don't need to be saved, you need to remember you once knew how to fly." Sebastian drew a long breath, smiling sadly. "Thank you, Mariah," he whispered, as if to a distant star. That same night in Brooklyn, Mariah sat at her desk reviewing the expansion plan for her program, Right to Heal. Lucia had fallen asleep on the couch, laptop still open to a photo from their first workshop, women smiling through tears. Mariah smiled tenderly. She picked up her pen and wrote in her notebook, "We never really lose anything. We learn to carry it lighter." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and looked out the window, New York, glowing endlessly against the night. For the first time, she felt entirely at peace, not because she had forgotten her pain, but because she had turned it into something beautiful. Morning in Manhattan. Sunlight slipped between the skyscrapers, spilling over the gray rooftops of the East Village. In a small apartment, Sebastian Hunt woke earlier than usual. No Patek Philippe watch, no housekeeper brewing his coffee. He boiled water, stirred in instant coffee, and watched the steam rise, bitter, straightforward, honest, like his life now. Every morning, he walked to the Street Marks Recovery Center. His steps fell slow on the pavement, no longer the confident rhythm of polished leather shoes, just the steady beat of an ordinary man. He was no longer Mr. Hunt, the CEO. At Street Marks, he was simply Sebastian. That morning, Dr. Patricia Morrison, his therapist, looked at him differently. Not as a case to assess, but as someone quietly transforming. "You seem calmer than before," she said. "Not really," he replied. "I still feel empty, but I'm resisting it less." "And why do you think that is?" "Because I stopped trying to fix everything. I just listen." She nodded slowly. "You once said you didn't know what love really was. Do you think you're starting to understand?" Sebastian was silent. After a long pause, he murmured, "Love isn't making someone need you. It's letting them be free and still being the one they choose." I never gave her that. The air in the room thickened. Patricia wrote something in her notebook, then said softly, "That's the first truth you've spoken without defending yourself." Sebastian smiled faintly, weary, but real. "I think I'm finally learning honesty, at least with myself." In the following months, he volunteered at St. John's Community Hospital, a place he'd once funded as a CEO. Now he did small tasks, filing records, cleaning rooms, helping patients sit up. No one there knew he had once been a millionaire. He didn't tell them. One day, he wheeled an older man out into the courtyard. The man smiled. "You been here long?" "Just a few months." The older man squinted at him. "You look like someone who used to be somewhere high up." Sebastian chuckled. "I was, and then I fell. Turns out, down here isn't as bad as I thought." The older man laughed. "Son, sometimes falling's the only way to stop and look around." Sebastian nodded. There was light in his eyes for the first time in years. Not the light of ambition, but of understanding. That evening, back home, he opened his old laptop, the cheap one he'd bought second-hand. On the Medium homepage was a new post, "The Men Who Learn to Listen" by Mariah Castellano. He hesitated, then clicked. Sometimes, to truly hear someone, we must lose the power of our own voice. I once loved a man who couldn't listen, and in his silence, I lost myself. But I, too, had stopped listening to me. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's stopping carrying the past not as a burden, but as a lesson. At the end, she wrote, "I hold no anger, because without him, I would not have become the woman I am today." Sebastian closed the laptop and sat quietly, no tears, no rage, only a deep, wordless gratitude. She had forgiven him without ever saying it aloud, and he knew that from now on, every step he took must be worthy of that grace. One September morning, he left Street Marks earlier than usual. He caught the number 2 train to Brooklyn, the first time in nearly 2 years. When he stepped off at Fort Greene, his heartbeat slowed. He didn't plan to see Mariah. He only wanted to walk the street where she once lived, to close a chapter silently. The street was the same. Red brick houses, oak-lined sidewalks, the corner cafe with espresso wafting into the breeze. He stopped in front of a small bookstore. In the window hung a poster, "Book signing with Mariah Castellano, Saturday." He stood there for a long time, gazing at her photo, the soft smile, the eyes still bright but gentler now. He didn't go inside. Instead, he pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote on a small flyer pinned beside the poster, "Thank you for living truthfully. The world needs more people like you. A reader." Then he walked away. No one knew who he was. And for the first time, he was okay with that. By November, he had moved closer to the hospital, continuing his volunteer work. He learned to listen, really listen to patients' stories. One afternoon, a young cancer patient handed him a red thread bracelet. "You're the only one who listens to me that long," she said. He smiled. "Why give this to me?" "Because you listen with your heart, not your ears." He turned away, blinking hard to hide his tears. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Mariah was packing for Utah, where the film adaptation of her book was set to premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. She folded clothes carefully, glancing out the window at the night sky. Her heart felt light, both full and peaceful. Lucia asked from the doorway, "Do you ever think you'll see him again?" "No," Mariah said gently, "because I don't need to. I already met the better version of myself." Lucia smiled knowingly. "And that's the most important meeting of a lifetime." That night, Sebastian stood by his window, looking at the faint stars above the city skyline. He didn't know where she was, but somehow he felt her presence alive, free, radiant. He whispered, "Be well, Mariah." Then he turned off the light, and for the first time he fell asleep without dreams of the past. Only the quiet peace of a man finally stopped running from himself. December in Manhattan. The city shimmered beneath winter's breath, Christmas lights wrapped around every avenue, people's laughter mingling with the fog of cold air like wisps of smoke. At the 92nd Street Y, hundreds lined up outside the hall. Tonight, they had come to see Mariah Castellano, author of Aftermath Resolution, honored as Inspirational Woman of the Year. Backstage, Mariah wore a pearl-colored silk dress, her hair loose in soft curls, her eyes glowing with quiet strength. She looked at her reflection not to check her makeup, but to confirm something deeper. "Have I really come this far?" Lucia stepped up beside her, adjusting the small pin on her shoulder. "You didn't go far, honey. You just came home to yourself." Mariah smiled faintly. "Lucia, without you." Lucia shook her head gently. "Without you, none of this would have happened." They embraced, simple, fierce, and full of gratitude. Out in the hall, the lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the space. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman who reminded millions worldwide of the power in choosing themselves, Mariah Castellano. Thunderous applause rose like a wave. Mariah stepped onto the stage. At the back row, a man sat quietly, dark coat, calm posture. Sebastian Hunt. No one knew he was there. He had no real reason to be. Only a quiet pull, a need to hear her voice one last time. Unfiltered, authentic. Mariah stood before the microphone, took a breath, and began. A year ago, I was a woman with a single bag, $1,247 in my account, and a shattered heart. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. The audience fell utterly silent. They said I wouldn't survive a week without him. But I did not just survive, but live. And that's the difference. Applause erupted. But Mariah lifted a hand, asking softly for quiet. I'm not sharing this to talk about him, she said. I'm sharing it because somewhere out there, millions of women still believe they can't live without someone when they really need to stop living without themselves. In the back row, Sebastian bowed his head. Each word she spoke threaded through the remnants of his memory, stitching together truths he'd once refused to see. Mariah smiled gently. And I want to thank the man who once made me lose everything because I found myself again through him. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I no longer let the past define the future. A hush swept the room. Someone wiped away tears. So did Sebastian. Mariah ended softly, her voice steady as stone and warm as light. If you've ever been made to feel small, remember you don't have to become grand to prove anything. You have to be real enough to exist. The hall rose to its feet. Applause thundered and lingered. The spotlight shone on her not as a halo of fame, but as the quiet radiance of truth. Later, after the crowd dispersed, Mariah stood alone by the tall window in the lobby. Below her, the city glittered like a sea of stars. She held a glass of champagne and exhaled softly. A low voice came from behind her. You spoke beautifully. She turned. Sebastian stood there. His eyes were gentler now, softened by time and humility, the look of a man who had finally stopped running. I knew you'd come, she said quietly. I didn't want to intrude, he replied. I just wanted to hear you speak. For real. Mariah's smile was calm, her tone neither cold nor bitter. I've been speaking in my real voice all year. They stood facing each other in the empty hall, faint piano music drifting in from another room. Sebastian spoke first. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not to earn forgiveness, but to stop hiding from myself. I lost everything, but only then did I understand what I'd thrown away. Mariah looked at him not with anger, but with the serenity of someone who had long made peace. I know. And I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. So I could be free. Silence settled, soft and full. Sebastian drew a slow breath. I see you on TV, in your books, in the eyes of people you've touched. You became everything I once feared you'd be, someone who didn't need me to shine. You shouldn't have been afraid of that, she said gently. I'm not anymore, he whispered. Now I'm just proud. Mariah's smile deepened. Thank you, Sebastian. They turned toward the window, watching the snow begin to fall, slow, silent, graceful. It felt like the world itself was closing an old chapter. Be happy, Sebastian said quietly. I am, she replied, her voice warm. And I wish you peace. He nodded, turned, and walked away. His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. Mariah watched him go, no pain, only the stillness that comes with proper closure. She whispered to herself, thank you for teaching me how to love myself. Outside, snow blanketed the streets of Manhattan. An old chapter closed. Two people who had once been bound by love and loss now walked separate paths, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Spring came early to Brooklyn that year. The first cherry blossoms bloomed along the sidewalks, their petals soft as breath. Mariah woke in her Park Slope apartment, morning light spilling through the window, brushing over framed photos on the wall. One showed her and Lucia laughing at the opening of the Aftermath Resolution Foundation. Another captured the women from her Right to Heal workshop, each holding the first drafts of their own stories, their smiles unguarded and proud. On her desk sat a letter from Columbia University. Congratulations. We are pleased to invite Miss Mariah Castellano to join the MFA in Creative Writing faculty. Mariah sat still for a moment, then burst out laughing. She remembered the years she believed that dream was dead, that writing was a luxury she'd forfeited. It hadn't died. It had only been waiting for her return. Lucia called, voice bubbling through the phone. Baby girl. Columbia? You're officially Professor Castellano now. Mariah laughed. It still feels like a dream. It's not a dream, Lucia replied. It's what happens when someone finally decides to live honestly. When she hung up, Mariah turned to her desk. Beside her coffee sat a new manuscript titled The House I Built from Silence. Her first novel since Aftermath Resolution, it told the stories of women who rebuilt themselves from the ashes of what had been destroyed. As she began to type, sunlight caught in her brown hair, a simple image, yet quietly miraculous. The light didn't glamorize her. It revealed her resilience. That afternoon, she taught her first class at Columbia. The room was modest, with walls of glass opening to the courtyard where young oaks were budding green. 12 students, journalists, artists, a single mother came for the same reason, to rediscover their voices. Mariah smiled at them. I'm not here to teach you how to write well, she said. I'm here to teach you how to write true. A young woman raised her hand. Do you think writing can save people? Mariah paused, then replied softly, Not exactly safe, but it can wake them up. The room fell into silence. Then one by one, pens began to move. The faint scratch of ink against paper filled the space like heartbeats. Deep in her bones, Mariah watched them and knew this was what she had been born to do. That night, she returned home to find an email from a Los Angeles studio. Mariah, the film adaptation of Aftermath Resolution, has been selected for Sundance. We'd love for you to attend and speak at the premiere. Travel details attached. She stared at the screen, her heart beating slow and steady. Sundance, the dream of every storyteller. She laughed, tears spilling silently. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, Everything he said I couldn't do, I did. But what I'm most proud of isn't success. It's because I kept my kindness. Across the city, Sebastian Hunt was beginning his day at St. John's Community Hospital. No titles, no corner office. He now works in the free clinic serving immigrants, day laborers, and those who can't afford insurance. A young nurse smiled at him. Dr. Hunt, aren't you tired? That's your 8th patient today. He replied quietly, When I was a CEO, I saved a company. Now I save people. I prefer the second. She looked at him with genuine respect, not for who he had been, but for who he was becoming. One afternoon, he helped an older woman take her blood pressure. She grasped his hand. You have kind eyes, she said. Sad, but kind, like someone who's lost something big. Sebastian smiled softly. Yes, but losing it helped me see. That evening, he turned on the TV. The news was covering Women of Inspiration at Sundance, 2026. There she was, Mariah Castellano, in a cream coat, laughing amid the Utah snow. Behind her, a poster read, Aftermath Resolution, the story of becoming. The anchor said, Based on the true journey of writer Mariah Castellano, the film has moved audiences to their feet, celebrating resilience and rebirth. Sebastian set his teacup down, eyes fixed on the screen. He watched her bow, heard her voice. If anyone watching this believes they've lost everything, remember, sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. He whispered, barely audible, You did it, Mariah. The glow of the TV reflected in his eyes, not with regret, but quiet admiration. A week later, a letter from the Aftermath Resolution Foundation arrived at the hospital. It was an invitation to collaborate. Free medical care for women recovering from financial or emotional abuse. Signed, Mariah Castellano. Sebastian read it several times. No personal note, no hidden message. Just business. Yet it told him everything. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free enough to see him as part of something good. He signed the agreement and sent it back. Then he murmured, Sometimes the best apology is living so decently that the same mistake could never happen twice. The next day, he stepped outside the hospital. The New York sky was clear, the wind crisp with the scent of the Hudson. People hurried past, each carrying an untold story. Sebastian smiled, realizing something simple yet profound. No one truly loses everything. Sometimes we're just allowed to begin again differently and better. He lowered his head, smiled to himself, and walked on, not fast, not slow, but with the quiet steadiness of a man who no longer needed to prove anything, only to live fully and truthfully. June in New York. The city was drenched in sunlight. Children's laughter echoed through Prospect Park, blending with the brass notes of a street band. Under the shade of an oak tree, Mariah Castellano sat with her laptop open. On the screen glowed the final chapters of her second novel, The House I Built from Silence. Beside her sat Marcus Chen, warm smile, quiet hands, eyes that listened. "Did you finish the last chapter?" he asked, setting down her coffee. "Not yet," she said. "I'm still searching for the right ending. For the story, or for yourself?" Mariah looked up, amused. "Maybe both." Marcus chuckled and broke off a piece of pastry. "So, how do you want it to end? With light? Then write about it." Mariah looked around, sunlight streaming through the leaves, gilding Marcus's face, catching in her coffee until it shimmered like amber. She smiled. "You're right. The light was never gone, I just forgot to look up." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began to type slowly, deliberately. Sometimes healing doesn't come from miracles. It comes from ordinary days when you learn to love the morning again, to trust sleep again, and to smile when no one's watching. Marcus gently took her hand. No promises, no grand gestures, just two people sitting under the sun, peaceful in the present. That afternoon, Lucia appeared with a bouquet of sunflowers. "Baby girl, the Aftermath Foundation has just reached 200 women who are supported. Do you hear me? 200 lives restarted because of you." Mariah hugged her tightly, eyes glistening. "Not because of me, because of all of us." Lucia laughed, proud and loud. "Sure, but you were the first brave enough to take the step." The wind lifted Mariah's hair. She looked up at the vast blue sky, a small cloud drifting slowly across it. She remembered the penthouse, the sleepless nights, the hollow days spent living for someone else. It felt like a distant dream, not painful, just softly faded. She whispered to herself, "I came back." 2 months later, the Sundance Film Festival hosted a special Manhattan screening of Aftermath Resolution. Mariah was invited to speak before the showing. Standing beneath the warm light, she began. "I thought my life had ended a year and a half ago, but it was only the first chapter of another story that we can rewrite with courage, honesty, and kindness." The theater fell silent. No one noticed the man seated quietly in the third row, head slightly bowed, eyes shimmering. Sebastian Hunt. He hadn't come to reclaim her, only to witness her. The woman who had once been his wife now stood radiant and whole, a lighthouse in her own right. After the screening, Mariah stepped onto the balcony when the crowd dispersed. Manhattan glowed beneath her, the summer night fragrant with warmth and rain. She heard footsteps behind her, slow, familiar, but no longer heavy with pain. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," Sebastian said softly. Mariah turned. "I'm not surprised," she replied. "You always show up when I no longer need you." Her tone wasn't cruel, just true. Sebastian nodded, gratitude softening his expression. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not because you forgave me, but because you didn't let hatred define what's left of me." Mariah studied him. "I never hated you. I only grieved the man you could have been." He smiled faintly. "So did I. But maybe losing you was what I needed to understand how to change." "You did change." "I hope so. I teach medicine now, at St. John's. I don't have power anymore, but I have purpose." She smiled. "Good. You're finally saving lives for real." They both laughed, not out of nostalgia, but recognition. They had survived, and they could still share the same air without pain. Sebastian looked at her, eyes clear, voice low. "You look happy." "I am happy," she said. They stood there for a while, saying nothing, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. Two souls who had once walked through each other's darkness, now standing free on opposite shores of healing. Sebastian bowed his head. "Goodbye, Mariah." "Goodbye, Sebastian. And thank you for being a part of the journey that made me who I am." He walked away. She turned back toward the skyline. Far beyond the buildings, the first blush of dawn was breaking the light of a new day. The next morning, Lucia texted her, "Baby girl, the sky is beautiful today. Sunrise walk?" Mariah replied with a photo sunlight pouring through her window, touching her coffee cup like a living flame. 4 simple words followed. "The sun has returned." Drayed. Some stories don't need a happy ending, only an honest one. Mariah didn't conquer anyone. She reclaimed herself. Sebastian wasn't punished. He was given a chance to begin again. And perhaps that is the most beautiful kind of justice, when everyone finds peace in their own way. You see, light doesn't come from those who've never fallen. It comes from those who were once extinguished, yet still chose to rise, still chose to love, and still chose to believe. And if this story touched your heart, leave a thought below. Have you ever had to leave to find yourself again? Because maybe your answer could be someone else's beginning.